Silent Hill F on Steam Deck. So this game is yet another UE5 game developed by NeoBards Entertainment, published by Konami. And I was surprised to see the Steam Deck compatibility as playable from Valve the day before release. Some in-game text is small, and this game requires manual configuration of graphic settings. So, yep. And the Proton version, according to Valve, 9.0-4, which, again, is good to see, but considering it's a UE5 game, those usually become unsupported a couple days after release. This one, marked as playable one day before, is a good sign. So let's get into it right away. So in the options menu, by default, we have 800p locked to 60 with VSync on. Let's disable VSync right away. Preset on performance with 100% screen percentage, so native. Lumen on high, screen space reflections, medium shadows, medium textures, medium shaders, medium to high settings, basically, with native resolution. Definitely this needs manual tweaks, but let's see how it runs like this without touching anything. Okay, so right away with the settings provided, obviously that's not enough. We're getting 20 FPS. Let's do some tweaks. What would I say are my final settings for this? Well, 800p, 30 FPS lock here or on the SteamOS menu. When it comes to screen percentage, 100%, this is not affected by FSR, only for TSR, so use this if you're using TSR. Lumen high indirect lighting for what I showed you a moment ago, screen space reflections, medium shadows, medium textures, low shaders, low visual effects, medium post processing, medium draw distance, FSR, unbalanced, no motion blur, and well, this is optional depending on you. So yes, as you can probably notice, despite the performance impact, is very worth it in order to keep the art of the game intact, to keep those reflections, that indirect lighting, and those shadows on medium. But again, if that's not a concern to you and want the best performance possible, well, you can decrease those as well. But it looks fantastic on balanced upscaling. And in this foliage heavy area, that's usually when games, especially UE5, drops the most, but the game looks fantastic, even with the upscaling. It's a bit soft with FSR, unfortunately. TSR is sharper, but the aliasing is way too aggressive on TSR, so up to you. Check both, see what happens. But yep, this is working fine. Way better than I expected, honestly. Especially considering how Silent Hill 2 ran, which, again, happened the same with the shadow quality. If you lowered it very much, it had horrible visuals, but at least here you can actually keep the visuals without the FrameGen and all that. And if you disable it, obviously, you're going to get the art style completely broken when we're talking about visuals. But this looks great. Of course, this is upscaled, but it's not performance upscaling. It's actually balanced, which is better than I expected, honestly. But that traversal stutter, yeah, seems to be unavoidable. But again, I think it looks pretty good, all things considered. If you ever play on a handheld, you should know that it's all about sacrifices to get things to work on the go. We are very heavily limited on power. I mean, only 15 watts. What can you say? When the game teaches you how to run, you know you're in trouble. Yeah, there are some drops here and there. Again, the CPU usage spike. That's a shame, honestly. But hey, it works. But those are things to keep in mind, unfortunately. Okay, here we go. We are still escaping. One thing that can help is using performance upscaling, but honestly, I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. Just due to the fact that the CPU usage spikes are the biggest issue. Okay, they're pretty creepy so far. Holy hell. Okay, let's get away. I'm good. But I like the monster design so far. That's the first one I've seen. But as you can see there, those spikes, you can make them less noticeable with a 30 FPS lock, which I'm going to do in handheld mode. To improve things a little bit also, since we are heavily memory limited, I mean, we're at the 16 gigs, we're using the entire RAM on the Steam Deck. I'd say lower those textures, but that texture quality on low is way too compromised. It's very muddy. So it works, but again, I'll keep those textures on medium. It's still completely fine to play like this, and the texture quality difference is pretty substantial. Welcome back, we're now in handheld. This is the OLED Steam Deck, and you'll be happy to see that there's HDR, and you can increase the brightness and contrast. Just for in-camera recording, I won't be using HDR, but it's an option if you want to use it. We're back in this part. Hopefully combat is right around the corner. But performance is pretty solid. With this unlocked frame rate, we're getting 2 hours of battery. Let's lock it to 30 and see what happens. Some UE5 games don't really like 30 FPS locks. This one seems to be, pretty flat overall. Let's skip this. But usually frame times are not 100% amazing on UE5 games when we're super close to the GPU's limit. Okay. A little bit too much stopping when attacking, but hey, that's usually what Silent Hill looked like when it comes to combat. Previous Silent Hill games. And those spikes in the frame time are still noticeable, so, but not as big as on connected to a monitor. So maybe there's an issue there. Okay, counter. Okay, pretty simple. Yeah, there you go. The frame time is a little bit spiky, but it feels pretty smooth, all things considered. And this will give you like 3 hours of battery according to the Steam Deck. So an extra hour of battery just by locking the frame rate. And honestly, looking at the game, considering it's UE5, as I said a moment ago, I was expecting significantly worse performance after coming from other 2 UE5 games published by Konami. So this is a surprise. It's a slow-paced game, yeah, it's more smaller environments, more claustrophobic. It's Silent Hill at the end of the day, so it matches perfectly. But hey, I've seen them F up in other UE5 games that should have run better. And consider it's not performance upscaling. For a UE5 game on a Steam Deck, that's a win. The only really big drop that I noticed was when I was getting chased around by that flower monster, that everything was turning into flowers around the character. But my main issue again is the frame time spikes when traversing with the spike in CPU usage. Oh, let's see, here's the monster. Yeah, and surrounded by that vegetation increases the GPU usage, but we're still there into the 30s. So it's more demanding when this shows up, which I'm pretty sure will happen more often in the game. Yeah, here it makes it drop pretty hard. But outside of those moments, it seems to be pretty good. Yeah, I'd say it's still playable. Let's try with FrameGen. With lossless scaling, as usual, you guys asked me to force the GPU clock to 1600 for moments like this, so there we go. CPU usage much higher. That's because, well, basically when we're maxing out the GPU clock, the CPU is starved of power. That's why I usually recommend the GPU clock, if you're doing something like this, to 15 or 1400 instead of 1600 to let the GPU stretch its legs a little bit. But as you can see, the frame rate here we're getting, first of all, looks pretty smooth. And input lag, yeah, I've seen certain artifacts as well. The input lag is there. In a game like this, you have real-time combat. I would argue against input lag, but the combat is so slow that I would say you could probably get away with it. Most people don't notice. Again, I'm not a fan of FrameGen, especially at lower than 60 FPS, but if you're playing on the go, again, it's all about sacrifices, as I said at the beginning of the video, if you're playing on a portable machine. So yeah, to avoid some of the stutter, I'd say 1400 on the GPU clock, so the CPU can load the assets as you're moving around, less of a CPU usage spike. But internally, the FrameGen, when it's getting 50 something FPS, yeah, maybe instead of 1400, 1500, and in between. As I was saying, so yeah, internally it's upper 20s, low 30s, especially in moments like this with that red foliage around us. So again, I argue against FrameGen because of the input lag, but if you're fine with it, it looks pretty smooth. There is input lag, but visually looks smooth. So all up to you there. But the game looks pretty good even without FrameGen, in my opinion. FrameGen really, again, I'm biased because I don't like FrameGen. So that's something to keep in mind while watching this video, but you just should know that it's an option. Personally, I'll just lock it to 30 FPS with the settings that I showed you. Balanced FSR. Again, going lower than balanced doesn't make sense because the game still drops below 30 in moments like this with that foliage. But it feels pretty good without FrameGen, in my opinion. So yeah, what's my advice? Keep the settings that I showed you. If you want to use FrameGen with lossless scaling, that's an option as well. You get some input lag, as usual, because the base frame rate is into the 30s. And well, the stutters, traversal stutter, seems to be unavoidable. It's better if you lock it to 30 to make it less obvious. But overall, a 30 FPS cap is highly recommended without FrameGen. Again, don't go lower than medium on shadows and on indirect lighting. The indirect lighting going anywhere away from lumen removes all the fog, and it really doesn't look like Silent Hill when you do that. Same with the shadows. If you go below medium, the shadows are basically gone, so yeah, not worth doing. But if you want to do it, you get a huge boost in performance. When it comes to upscaling, balance FSR. Going anywhere lower from balance FSR makes no sense. The game still drops below 30 in those red foliage moments when you're being chased around or when you're fighting. And yeah, that's a shame that you cannot do that. But again, all things considered, this is a UE5 game, a new one, from a publisher that usually releases bad performing UE5 games, running on balance upscaling on Steam Deck at 30 FPS with some drops into the 20s. So I think that's a positive from beginning to end. It's not 100% perfect, obviously, due to the spikes in the CPU usage. But again, I think it's completely fine. Considering how slow Silent Hill games usually are, I think this is completely acceptable, and you retain a lot of the visuals of this UE5 game. It runs on PS5 if you put it at a 60 FPS target at like 720 to 360p internally. I think this is pretty damn impressive. So yeah, Silent Hill F would have recommended on Steam Deck. I mean, yeah, if you don't mind the small text and some drops below 30 without FrameGen, you should be good to go with those tweaks that I told you from the options menu. The game looks great. Despite the upscaling, I think it holds up very well on the 7-inch screen. But again, moments like this, when you're being chased around and you get those red foliage things chasing you, that's when it suffers the most, even with FrameGen on. Other than that, it's usually a completely fine experience. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Cannot believe a UE5 game is running properly on Steam Deck. And I'll see ya next time. Bye guys, thanks for watching. I gotta get away!